Anybody got a question this morning? Nick.
So on Sunday nights, we watched the video on the alphabet and where it came from and how we got it. And I had a question, and I'm assuming that you've seen it. It seems like a lot of the scholars of the present day are getting their information and basing their information off of a different Exodus path than what the video did. And I'm just wondering if I'm right on that, because they didn't really touch on it, but that's what I got out of it, and if you would comment on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an important one. Okay, how many of you saw Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments? I knew they did a later Ten Commandments, but I mean, hey, if it doesn't have Charlton Heston in it, it didn't count, Okay, but you remember Yul Brynner, being Pharaoh, so let it be said, so let it be done type of thing. That's based on that same, say, roughly 1250 BC date for the Exodus, okay? And that's Ramses. They did a section here where they had the wall, where they had statues of Ramses and stuff like that. And remember, they did that because the Scripture records that the storage cities of Pithom and Ramses were, being built by the Hebrews, okay? And so they just, boom, take that, and that's the date, okay? But let's go to 1 Kings chapter 4 or 6 for just a second. 1 Kings 6 and verse 1. 1 Kings 6:1 says, "Now it came about in the 480th year, after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord." Okay? Now, we've talked before, we have some charts around here, that we're able to tie our calendar to the calendar of the Assyrians. And the reason they were able to do that, well, there was a solar eclipse that took place, I think it was June 15th, 763 BC. And it was from 9 until noon, and it was 98% total at Nineveh. Just north of Nineveh, it was a total eclipse, all right? The Assyrians recorded that. See, and so we can spin our planetarium backwards, and we can then use that to mesh our calendar with the Assyrians. Now, because the Assyrians were contemporaries with the nation of Israel, and fought, eventually took the northern kingdom away captive, the Assyrians recorded a lot of the same battles and a lot of the same kings that the Bible does. And so we're able to mesh the Bible chronology to the Assyrian chronology. See, the result is we're able to put firm dates on some things. So, for example, 1050 BC, that's when King Saul started to reign. 1010 BC, that's when David started to reign. And God did it kind of nice, Saul reigned 40 years, David reigned 40 years, and Solomon's going to reign 40 years. Okay? So we know that the reign of Solomon, this is a solid date, we know that Solomon began to reign in 970 BC. So the 4th year then is 966 BC, all right? So you back that up, what do you say, 480 years? Okay? That's going to give you 1446 BC for the date of the Exodus. Okay? So there you have a firm Bible date. Okay? So, now, one of the things about the scholars in general, they are opposed to anything in the Bible. Any chance they get to go in some other direction, they're going to take it. So they pile on that Ramses in the storehouse city, okay? Now there's a previous video, that lets you know that the earlier name for that was Avaris. Now personally, I'd never heard of Avaris until I started looking at these videos. Ramses. Okay? And thank you, Dick. So I never really heard of Avaris, and then I looked at one of my old Bibles. Sure enough, Avaris. Okay, Avaris was the city that the Hebrews lived in the land of Goshen, and they built the city of Ramses over the top of it. So, when they put in the scripture together, one of the things that they did was they, labeled it Ramses instead of Avaris, because nobody would have known what Avaris is. They, call it Ramses. Okay, but they're going to jump. They're going to jump on. They're going to jump on that and say that's the date. See, and because of that, everything is all out of whack. All right, but when you know that city was Avaris, then the 1446 BC date for the Exodus fits perfectly, and then that ties in with the development of the alphabet and the whole works. So further thought on that, Nick? Okay, Mr. Luke Wilson?
Just want to make sure I understood. So I've never done this part of the research. I just assumed that after the fact that they were putting in the name Ramses because that's what it turned into later. But what you're saying is originally, so you're saying the Bible translators changed it to Ramses, or that Moses did do Ramses, but it was after, that's what it would have been
later. Translators.
Later translators, okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. There's also a reference in Genesis as well. See, that couldn't, in other words, in the Moses days, it would have been really pretty been known as probably Avaris.
So earlier translations would have translated Avaris?
Probably. See, we don't have any way of knowing that. Okay, but it makes sense that, because there's, a little of what they call anachronisms all the way through, to make things be clear.
The video that you're referring to that this is all built off of is called Patterns of Evidence. And they do an absolutely outstanding job showing exactly that the famine, all that stuff happened at a specific time. They can date it all, and there's a bunch of anomalies that only can be understood in view of the Bible.
Yeah. And again, we'll be showing those progressively. It's called, yeah. Go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say, I will show those other ones down the road on Lord's Nights, but we're going to have some months of other stuff in between.
Yeah.
But we will be hitting those other ones.
Yeah. But it is Patterns of Evidence, and there's about 5 or 6 videos there that you can get a hold of. Mel?
Tidbit, trivia. The Navajo Nation, one of the few, if any, though maybe the only one, that actually had an alphabet.
Yeah.
So the native, we look at the American natives and Indians as being very primitive, but the Navajo was to the point where they actually had an alphabet and had words that could build from them.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, how are they going to pass on the instruction how to do turquoise? Yeah.
Well, remember, the Navajo was what they called the talkers during the Second World War, and that really, the Japs really couldn't figure that one out.
Yeah. See, again, the story on the Navajo talkers is that, the Japanese kept breaking the codes that we had. So finally, somebody came up with the idea of using the Navajo Indians. They give the message, the Navajo Indian would, would speak it in Navajo. Guy on the other hand, Navajo Indian would translate it back into English, because the Navajo language was so complex that the Japanese couldn't decode it. So it's a holdover from something way in the past, and the fact that they had their alphabet. So, Nick?
Avaris and Ramses, do they mean the same thing?
No,
Translate?
different names, different cities actually. One built on the top of the other.
Okay. I was just sitting there going, we've always known him as Ramses. Older translations show it as Avaris.
No, they don't show it as Avaris, they show it as Ramses.
Okay.
But our work shows that the original name was Avaris underneath Ramses.
Okay. I guess I was thinking, and maybe I misheard that Ramses, the pharaoh, his name was originally Avaris. No, okay, I misheard.
Yeah, the city Ramses gets its name from Pharaoh Ramses. See, but that's too late. That's too late for Moses. See, so the original city was Avaris, and looks like a later editor just changed it to Ramses so that the readers would know, because Avaris disappeared. But Ramses was known.
So, we came to the date just now of 1446 BC Exodus, and I've never seen that before. That's actually really cool. But some cursory, not rigorous research at all, just Googled it. It said that so in the patterns of evidence, the one that we're watching, it said that the Pharaoh that was reigning during the time of the Israelite Exodus, as far as we can tell, is actually Amenemhat III.
Yep.
And when I looked it up, the time of his reign in secular research, at least, is the 18th or 19th century BCE, BC. So I have two questions. One is BCE the same thing as BC and they just kind of hijacked it? It is? Okay. And two, why are the dates 400 years apart?
Well, another video deals with the fact that when they set the dates for the Egyptians, okay, there's what they call dark periods in there, and they made the dark periods bigger than they actually are. Okay, but that's, I mean, it takes, you try to do your own research on this, you can spend the rest of your life digging into it, but that's how that all fits. So it's good. Other questions on that? And I do want to comment, on the significance of the alphabet, the fact that it really looks like God worked with, say, probably Joseph to actually develop the first alphabet in the history of the world. See, and even these guys recognize it's a stroke of genius, to actually invent, an alphabet. And, it had to be done in Egypt. It had to be Hebrew type of person that did it, because they used some Egyptian things to set in motion the Hebrew alphabet. So pretty amazing how that works. Another thing I want to comment on is you can tell that the devil actually opposes any forward movement of the truth. You can see, those of you guys that had the chance to watch that video, the scholars fought the idea that it would be the Hebrews. Anybody but the Hebrews. Canaanites, Phoenicians, anybody but the Hebrews developed the alphabet. Well, why? I mean, they end up with words like Proto-Sinaitic, okay, or Proto-Canaanitic, or Proto-Hebraic, okay. But the question is, they always want to make it Proto-Canaanite, okay. Why couldn't it be Proto-Hebrew? See, but no, it's going to be Canaanites. It can't be the Hebrew peoples. And see, it's that you have to understand. See, the devil is real, and the devil is engaged in a lot of deception and a lot of misdirection. See, anything he can to divert things, and he's behind the scenes because he's an evil spirit. He's done. I mean, thinking of the guy with the cloven hoofs and the horns and stuff. I have to say this. I did see on a National Enquirer back about 1978. National Enquirer is kind of one of these, magazines you could get, at a town pump or something like that. And they had a picture of the devil's skull found in New Mexico. So, just, if Mel's going to do a little trivia, I guess I get to do a little trivia too. But see, the devil's a spirit. And he's a universal spirit in the sense that everybody is either in Satan's domain or in the dominion of Christ. See, and there's nobody that gets to take neutral ground. And so he puts this constant pressure in the wrong direction all the time at every possible point. And you have to process that when you're looking at that. So, the scholars are all, their first proposition is can't be the Hebrews. Why can't it be the Hebrews? Well, it just can't. Has to be something else. And that's their, that's the devil working. And you see that across the board. I was looking at some evolution creation stuff the other day. And when anybody objective that would look at this, say the human body, for example, Katie was asking me some questions the other day about the human chromosomes. We were, talking about X's and Y's and what's that mean, and why does that make us male or female and stuff like that. And you start looking at stuff, with half an eye open. You realize very quickly that this is not the result of random action. Absolutely could not happen by random action, okay? And so what do they do? They just take the idea that was designed off the table. Can't go there. Just take it off the table. Well, you only got two options, designed or accident. So if you take design off the table, see, what's that leave you with? But see, that doesn't make the fact that it's right. But see, the whole prejudice, see, human beings are subject to a lot of peer pressure. It's a big factor. Let's look at John chapter 12 for just a second. So John chapter 12 and verse 42. John 12, 42 and 43. It says, nevertheless, many even of the rulers, that be the rulers of the synagogues, believed in Jesus, but because the Pharisees, they were not confessing him, for fear that they'd be put out of the synagogue, for they love the approval of men rather than the approval of God. Okay, what is that? Well, it's peer pressure. These guys believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They're not going to open their mouths. Okay? And you see that all the way across the board. Back in about 1986, we sponsored a creation evolution debate, and Dr. Dwayne Gish, we had him come in he was at UCLA at the time, Southern California, and we had Dr. Vincent Sayrich out of UC Berkeley come in, and so they'd flown in they ended up catching the same plane out of Salt Lake together into Bozeman, and so we took them out for an early supper before the debate started at 7 up on the university campus. Anybody here remember that debate? And so we're there eating with them, and I asked Dr. Sayrich, I said, we had a very different, he was the evolutionist guy, Dr. Gish's Institute for Creation Research. And so I asked Dr. Sayrich, I said, why did we have such a difficult time getting anybody to debate Dr. Gish? We tried to get a professor here at MSU, not a chance. U of M, not a chance. Anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, that'd be WSU, UW, not a chance. Okay? Sayrich was the only guy that would step up, and he'd already debated Gish 6 times before. Okay? So they knew each other. So I asked Dr. Sayrich, why did we have such a difficult time getting anybody to debate with Dr. Gish? He said, well, you have to understand. See, most evolutionary scientists just assume evolution to be true. And he said they've never asked any deeper questions. And that's one of their guys that said they just assume it to be true. You see this same thing with these scholars. See, they just assume, okay, everybody believes the Ramses story of the Exodus and that time, so that must be true. See, and it's the same question I always ask myself. Isn't anybody asking any questions? Okay? You know, I mean, I was always the kid in the, you know, my name was Wilson, and we sat alphabetical, and so I was in the back, okay? And so I was the kid in the back, you know, hey, I got a question. You just see the teacher now, you know, this kid again. But, okay, why aren't they asking the questions? See, a classic example is a senior class that we were required, all public schools in the state of Montana at the time, were required to take this class called Problems of Democracy. Okay, now the biggest problem is the United States is not supposed to be a democracy, but that's not going to be discussed. And see, but I remember Mr. McGowan was a coach, okay? And, you know, so he had to teach some other subjects, you know. And, you know, he's a good guy. Mr. McGowan was a coach. And so he's the teacher assigned to teach Problems of Democracy. And so he's teaching us change. Now I know, looking back at that, what that was, you know. And so, okay, I raised my hand, you know, and, you know, Mr. McGowan required us, you know, to stand. So I stood, and I said, Mr. McGowan, I have got a question. If change takes you the wrong direction, is change good? Do you think that's a good logical question? Oh, he said, change is always good. See, because he was carrying out the idea of being what they call a change agent. See, of the agenda that's been in place in the public school for generations. See, and a change agent is somebody that's actually pushing you toward humanism and away from the biblical values that your parents might have. See, and so that's why change is always good. See, but I really wasn't allowed to ask that question. See, is the point. And then, see, they set it up that way. So the guys that you see on these videos, see, that are shoving everything away from it being the Hebrews and being this date right here, see, because that's a pretty firm date. See, when you see these guys pushing away from that, it's because they already bought into another agenda, and they're not going to ask the questions. Now, what's the problem here? Let's see, they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God. Yeah, that's it. So how many grants are you going to get a university system if you're a creationist? How many grants are you going to get over in the history or archaeology department if you're a biblical, 1446 BC Exodus guy? How many are you going to get? Are you going to get any? How many of your papers are going to be published unless you self-publish them? They're not going to be. See, now who's doing that? That's the God of this world. See, and you have to realize how real he is, and how devious and how deceptive and how destructive he is. And you have to try to recognize his agenda when that agenda is in motion. If you go to 2 Corinthians, this showed up in the Bible Bowl scriptures here. 2 Corinthians 2:11. Paul says, so that no advantage, 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, so that no advantage would be taken of us by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his schemes. When we're ignorant of his schemes, he has the opportunity to work us over pretty good. See, and the scripture is giving us the principles by which, if we pay attention to them, we can see what Satan's schemes are. But we got to pay attention. We got to pay attention because, he works on every area, every angle, that's why he's called the prince of the power of the air. So that's what's going on. So further comments on that, Nick?
Just a little confused on the Avaris Ramses thing. If it was Avaris, why would the translators not have translated it Avaris and translated it Ramses later?
Well, it wasn't so much a translation as an editor. See, that's the only explanation as to why it wouldn't be Avaris, because in Moses' time it was Avaris. That was the city they left, was Avaris. Okay? And the excavations show that. Okay? So, but Moses isn't alive at the time of Ramses. But some editor was. So in two places where it would have been Avaris, which nobody would have known where that was, they changed it to Ramses. That's
So much later written.
yeah. Okay. So, so all your translation, I mean, we don't have any of the original Hebrew texts, so we got the copies. So they're translating it correctly, Ramses, because that's how it was written. See, and so if you understand, yeah, okay, somebody was just trying to make it clear, where that city was, and that's true. That where that city was that's where they came from. Okay, that's just that. Like I said, I'd never heard of Avaris until I, looked at this video, and then, like I say, it's looking at one of my Bible maps, Avaris. But I never even seen that before, because that's how little known it is even today. Yeah, good. Mel?
I'm not sure that I got the names of the songs or the cities quite right, but way back in most people's ancient history that are in the class in here, there was a song that was you couldn't go back to Constantinople or because it didn't exist anymore. It was the old city didn't exist anymore because the name was changed to Constantinople, I think it was.
Yeah.
It was actually a song that made the hit parade, believe it or not.
No kidding. That was a long time back, Bill.
Yeah, that's why I say most people wouldn't even realize that it was ever,
Yeah.
that it happened. So,
Yeah, because the original name was Byzantium, changed to Constantinople, and then eventually went back to Byzantium. So, yeah, it's pretty. Yeah. So, there's a little town out here called Gallatin Gateway. The original name though was Salesville, and it was Salesville, and then Yellowstone Park came into existence, and so the Northern Pacific Railroad, they used to run a passenger line through here, and the automobiles hadn't really developed yet. They're going to develop very rapidly, but Northern Pacific isn't anticipating that, so they're going to develop a jumping off place for people to go to Yellowstone Park. And so they persuaded the residents of Salesville to change the name of the town to Gallatin Gateway, because Gallatin Gateway looks a lot better on the posters that Northern Pacific is going to describe. I mean, you want to go to Salesville, but Gallatin Gateway. See, I mean, so those things do happen, and so sometimes you might have had to said to an old timer, Salesville, but if you said Salesville to a modern person, what? Salesville? I never heard of Salesville. Oh, it's Gallatin Gateway. Oh, Gallatin Gateway. See, same type of thing. Other questions or thoughts on that? Yeah, Caden.
Kind of on the theme of scholars having an anti-supernatural bias, I remember doing some research for New Testament studies, and a particular scholar was in a debate with a New Testament, like a Christian, and he said that even if these miracles happened, the work of a historian couldn't verify it, because the work of a historian doesn't work and deal in miraculous events. And you can just see in the realm of scholarship, New Testament, Old Testament, scientific, like there's an anti-supernatural bias. The reason that the Bible can't be true is because it records miracles, which is presupposing that miracles can't happen. But of course, if God exists and we have good reason to believe that, of course Jesus could have rose from the dead. So I just think that's it's interesting that a New Testament scholar said, even if it happened, we couldn't verify it because we can't we can't verify miracles.
Yeah. Okay. All history depends upon eyewitness accounts. You know, whether it's somebody that recorded it or somebody that recorded somebody, it was an eyewitness account. I like to use the example. You know, one of the early guys in in Virginia City was Thomas Timsdale. He was a teacher. He came in and started a high school in Virginia City, and became the editor of I think it was the Montana Post or Montana Post. You know, first newspaper of Montana Territory. Okay, and so afterward he wrote a book on the vigilantes. You know, some of you probably have read that book or run across it. Okay, so he was there. You know, and he knew, he knew who some of the vigilantes were. Okay, because and so he records the story of the vigilantes. So the guys that are writing, 100 years later, they're trashing Dimsdale's work, as being too prejudiced because he was an eyewitness. Okay, well, all good history is based on eyewitness account. Okay, Flavius Josephus was an eyewitness of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, so you trash his report because he's prejudiced. He's an eyewitness. Couldn't be objective, right? But see, you can tell if you got somebody that writes in an objective, a little bit subdued fashion. Okay, that tells you that their eyewitness account is going to be pretty accurate. They're trying to write it without prejudice. And you can tell in the writing whether they're trying to do that or not. So when you get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what are we dealing with? Eyewitness account. Either the person himself, or in the case of Mark and Luke, interviewing somebody who was an eyewitness. Okay? And so you don't get to trash that as being history just because you don't like what you're reading, okay? And and again, you got a great point, Caden. If there's no God, there can't be miracles, right? So therefore, since there isn't any God, the assumption is there can't be miracles. And so Thomas Jefferson can take his penknife and cut the reference to the miracles out of his Bible because miracles can't happen, right? Yeah, it's a good point. Other comments here? Another question. Mondi, from Colorado Springs this morning. Mr. Mondi Villalobos with us.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to, am I loud?
No, you're doing great. You just got a voice that ought to be on radio, man.
Just wanted to take something that you had commented on a step further in regards to, our enemy. We are in a tremendous spiritual battle here. And, there's a lot of focus on the Christian maintaining their focus on Christ and glory. There's a lot of focus on cleansing the inside of the cup, renewing our minds from the inside out. And helping my daughter study with the Bible Bowl, there's something that as I'm moving forward, there's something that kind of caught my attention. And I want to read in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, starting with verse 3, says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our afflictions so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so also our comfort is abundant through Christ." And if we move on to chapter 7, 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 6, it says, "But God, who comforts the depressed, comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted in you, as he reported to us your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more." The thought that I wanted to share was, there's so much emphasis on moving forward. There's so much emphasis on again, Christ in glory. But there's that little perk there of God, our comforter, our Father, comforting us. The in this spiritual battle, there's so many fights that are won. There's some that are lost. There's some that you learn from, and even there's rejoicing in that. But there's comfort, and I for one it's one of the things that's often overlooked. So in your studies, in your verse memorization, consider those things, because it's there to make use of it.
Yeah.
So if you want to expound upon that.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a couple commentaries on 2 Corinthians, and the title of it's Comfort / Encouragement from Corinthians. See, that because that's one of the key or the major points in that. So they're available on the book rack out there, and but yeah, see, it's a great point. Comfort / see, sometimes comfort could be translated, or the thrust maybe is a little bit better. Encouragement. Kind of need both. Okay, and but that's a great point. Further comments on any of that? Another question here today, Tim.
Just going back over through the, see what the Septuagint translated at. Nate translated Ramses. It's in the Greek. But I was noticing as I was looking through there, Ramses applied to the point of time when they came from Canaan in to Egypt, not when they left.
Yeah.
Joseph gave them land in Ramses. So that had to be something completely, it doesn't make sense so there's 400 years or so between when they come and when they leave. Ramses can't be Pharaoh the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of where you kind of have to go if you are thinking the way they are.
Yeah, exactly right. See, it only adds up as if an editor changed it from Avaris to Ramses. That's the only thing that makes sense. Yep, good point. Other questions here today? Yeah, Mel?
It's not a question, but Judy didn't read fiction at all. She read the lives of important people, and one of the examples that I have to see, she probably read 5 books of Winston Churchill's life in order to get the true facts.
Yeah.
Or her conclusion of the true facts, because so much of it would contradict each other.
Yeah.
These people that wrote the stories.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because, again, if you read, say, also biographies of General MacArthur, you're going to get a lot of contradictory points. Or if you go back and read certain stories of the American Revolution, you're going to get contradictory points. I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Jeff Shara, Chaari, I think. He's a 2-part on the American Revolution, and he's doing a pretty objective job. But a number of years ago, I read one called The Patriots, and this is by a liberal guy who was doing everything he could to trash, the heroes of the American Revolution. And I read it twice. I went back and I read it twice because I wanted to, to try to get that perspective. See, but if you read just his book, you wouldn't get a very good perspective on what the American Revolution was really all about, because he's trying to view it through a lens that promotes a modern agenda. Okay, so that's not objective, but it's valuable. Because the conclusion of that book I mentioned, last night I was reading where Washington was trying to get his troops out of New York, and one of the things that happened was a fog came in and prevented the British warships from moving up the Hudson River or the East River and cutting off Washington's escape, the Army's escape. And there's just little things like that happen. Another thing that was brought out in the book The Patriots I mentioned is Cornwallis led his army onto the peninsula at Yorktown, expecting the British fleet to arrive, and to bring more troops and more supplies. But unknown to Cornwallis, a massive storm out at sea had blown the British fleet off course. And so what sailed into the harbor was the French Navy instead of the British Navy. And so Cornwallis was surrounded on three sides of the peninsula by the French Navy, and he couldn't get out of the peninsula because Washington's men would have just picked him off. So all the British could do was lay down arms. And there's all kinds of things like that. And so in the conclusion of the book, the author of the Patriots put it this way. He said, in an incredible string of coincidences, which he said George Washington called divine providence, see, the American Revolution against all odds was successful. See, I mean, I'm trying not to, see, it's like these liberal scholars see on the date. I'm trying not to go there. See, but sometimes, like Mel said, you got to read, quite a number of books to even try to get a real perspective. The only truly accurate history is right here in our hands. This one's objective. It's written from a very objective point of view, okay? And it shows the good and the bad and the ugly, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. It tells it the way it is and the way it was, and also the way it's going to be. And that's good to know. It's that which will guide our lives. So, another quick question or quick comment here, Dan. Thank you, Lena.
I was going to meet you down the aisle.
Okay.
Just a quick question. So the video that we watched on Sunday nights proposes the idea that Joseph was the one that came up with the alphabet. If that was the case, and I have my own thoughts on why this is, but I want to get your thoughts. Why wouldn't the Egyptians adopt that alphabet? And I mean, because there's 400 years of slavery from the Jews, the Hebrews. I mean, that's 400 years that they could adopt. If it's obviously more efficient, why wouldn't they adopt that?
Well, they're not Hebrews. Okay? If you're Egyptian and you think your culture is superior, and the people underneath you are slaves, are going to be slaves, why would you adopt their stupid alphabet? See, that's how they're going to think. Okay? We teach a subject called algebra, right? What language is algebra from? Arabic. That's an Arabic word, algebra. Okay? And so one of the things that Arabs did, because the Red Sea is between Arabia and India, the Arabs came in contact with the India Indians, right? Well, the India Indians had a number system that looks something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? That's contrasted to something like this. I, IV, right? See, which one of those is superior? Okay? So, it's going to take a little while before Western civilization is going to accept this, right? Because it's coming from the Arabs, right? Or Moors, as they came to be called as they went into Western Europe, okay? It's going to take a while before Western civilization is going to accept the superiority of this numeric system over this one. Same way with the alphabet. The Egyptians, they're not going to accept it. It's going to take a while before it's going to be known that an alphabetic system is contrasted to a hieroglyphic system superior. So.
Just a quick follow-up on that. It is interesting that because of the Egyptians, you know, we're assuming their refusal to accept the Hebrew alphabet, that they left a trail from Egypt to the Canaan, you know, area. And so, like, the only group of people that went from Egypt to Canaan was the Hebrews.
Yep.
So it also had, I mean, I think God had his hand in that also.
Yep. Oh, well, clearly had his hand in. I mean, if that, we talked before that God brought the nation Israel into existence by miracle. He preserved them by miracle, because through them he's producing the Scripture ultimately. So.
We still, referring to taking time, there are still several languages that still use the hieroglyphics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's Japanese and the Chinese still use that. They still haven't adopted the alphabet.
Yeah. See, I talked to a Chinese guy on an airplane here, one time coming back from the Philippines, and he said that, yeah, they're starting to use the first letter, of the hieroglyphics or the Chinese sign. They're starting to use that because computers is forcing them to move toward a more alphabetic system. See, but the Chinese alphabet started in 2500 BC. That's 4,500 years of tradition on that, and so to change over to an alphabetic system, obviously going to have a lot of resistance. But the computers are forcing them to do that.